take the microphone. The first time, Richard was only ordained a few months, and I was walking home from church, and this car pulls up at the curb. Now in Chicago, that's a dangerous thing. And this woman, who I have no idea who she was, rolls down her window and she says, "I love it when your husband preaches." And she said, "Because his story is mine. He knows what I'm dealing with. When he talks about his kids, when he talks about his bills, when he talks about his struggles with his job, I can hear him." Rich has been ordained a little bit over, well, I was going to say 10, but it's 11 years, and I don't know how many times I've heard that. And I think that's the gift that the permanent diaconate is to the church. You are the foot in both worlds, and people see you with your priorities and know that because of their baptism they are called in a similar way. And so when you struggle and sometimes succeed and sometimes fail, they can relate to that. So don't beat yourselves up. You're doing a good job.
I would just like to ask the panel to tell us some of the unusual things that they've done. I'll give you a couple of examples. I baptized triplets in Stanley one day. And there's, of course, no church there, but there's a nice little chapel. But the most special thing that I've ever had to do, or wanted to do, as some of you know, my wife died a year and a half ago, and my brother died 3 weeks ago. My brother was a Catholic priest, and he was a person who loved people. I mean, how can you do what he did? He celebrated Mass 3 times a day, every day of the week, and in 3 different locations. And so he had 3 funerals. He had a funeral at the nursing, at his sister's place where he had been working for 28 years. He had another funeral at the parish where he'd been working 31 years, and another funeral, all in a day and a half, at where he was living. And so I got to be the homilist for the 3 funerals, and I also got to bury my brother. So that was a pretty unusual thing to do for him. So anyway, just to give you some idea that God works in strange and wonderful ways, and He allows us to do different things that you'd probably never even think of doing. So, in case you have some special ideas, I'd appreciate it.
Just prior to coming up here, we were in between priests. So I was fortunate or unfortunate to be in charge of a very large parish during Holy Week with supply priests to come in and help out. So and I was also the director of RCIA, and so that Easter Vigil, they wanted to be immersed when they were baptized. So we got a big tub and I went in with them and immersed them, which I really enjoyed. Went in the other room, got dressed with them, all rested. However, the next morning, I decided that I wanted to baptize a baby at 10:30 Mass. So we have a big, large font and all the rest of it. So I put it in front of the ambo and baptized this naked baby on Easter Sunday morning and presented this child to the people. Lion King? Yeah. It was wonderful, an experience I'll never forget. So.
Well, I don't know how unusual it is, but I work in campus ministry, and one of the things that happens sometimes in campus ministry is that you have a young woman who is pregnant and she is not married, and she is very distressed and terribly, terribly shamed, and all of the emotions that you could possibly imagine. And in the Book of Blessings, there's a blessing for a woman who has not yet delivered her child. And one of the most meaningful things that I ever do in a circumstance like that is that we go into the chapel and I fast, and we have whoever she wants there. Usually it's just a couple of us there. and we do that blessing from the Book of Blessings. And you can say to someone, I'm not judging you, or I support you, or your church doesn't judge you, or your church supports you. And that just kind of, they hear it, but it doesn't, they don't really hear it. But the rite itself, the blessing itself, is just powerful. And you get to walk back out of that chapel, and that young woman who was just so burdened by carrying hundreds of pounds on her shoulders, she's visibly taller, but because she's had it demonstrated to her that she's being supported and she's not being judged. I think that's one of the most beautiful things I've ever been able to do as a deacon.
I received a call from the hospital one afternoon. He said, can you come and pray with this family? This woman had a baby, been on life support for 3 days now, 3 days since it was born, and they're going to pull the plug. Going there, praying with her, praying with the baby, holding the baby, having the baby handed over to her, and being there with her during that whole time. Once they pull all the support equipment, they said it could be anywhere from a half an hour to 2 hours before all the chemicals kind of process out, and then it'll quit breathing and the heart will stop. And just being there with them. My wife went with me. She always goes with me when I go to the hospital. But it was beautiful to be there with that family, to be there to help them through this phase in their life. It was a tough time. We've gone through that experience of losing a child, so we could understand. But this is what God calls us to be there for the people when they need it.
Amen. From the sublime to the ridiculous. One time, it was Easter morning, and I arrived in the sacristy to vest, and the deacon who had been at the previous liturgy had just left, and he came back into the sacristy, and he said, "There's a bat in the vestry." And I looked around like someone else was going to take care of it. And I realized everybody in the sacristy was looking at me to take care of that. So I went out, and that appeared to be dead. He was laying in between. This is in Chicago, and we had a big bucket of salt to melt the ice, and the bat was sort of laying between that bucket and the door, and looked dead. I know better than to pick up a bat with my bare hands. I may be dumb, but I'm not stupid. So I got a towel, and I picked up the animal, and I carried it out into the street. It was a bright, sunny, glorious Easter morning day, and I put it down in the gutter, and it wasn't dead. That's about the most unusual thing. Are there any other? Father?
After listening to you, I was wondering if telling this joke about permanent deacons was appropriate. But now I think it is. There was a group of permanent deacons, and their wives all died before they did, and their wives, of course, all went to heaven. And so St. Peter got to spend a lot of time with them, finding out about the deacons that were still left on the earth. And so the deacons were really sad. They were living a celibate life, but it wasn't necessarily easy. And so once a year they would get together and take a train ride up to a resort, and like Deacon Cummings said, they would talk about it over a few ales and get their problem solved. So on the train on the way up there was a train wreck, and all of the deacons died at once. And they were up at the pearly gates, and St. Peter comes walking out, and he said, I want you to form two lines. On the line on the left will be all the deacons who did whatever their wives told them to do. And the line on the right will be the deacons that didn't always do whatever their wives told them to do. And so St. Peter waits, and the line on the left is really long, and he looks, and he's going, oh boy, these guys are telling the truth. I think I'm going to let them in. And then he looks over at the other line, and there's one deacon standing there. And so St. Peter goes over to him, and he says, you didn't do whatever your wife told you to do? And he said, why are you standing in this line? And he said, well, my wife told me to stand over there.
Thank you all.
Richard asked me just to say a few words by way of summary, so I'm honored to do so. I'm very grateful to the men who gave us examples from their life and their service about how they have attempted to serve the various communities in which they have been located, and how those communities, in a sense, have served them. It's really not a one-way street. Any minister, bishop, priest, or deacon will tell you that. You receive as much as you give. You receive more than you give. But perhaps we could summarize the gist and the direction of our conversation together like this. To be a Catholic Christian is to be in service. To be a Catholic Christian is to be someone who is willing to stand up and be counted when circumstances dictate that. Here I am, what can I do to help? That should be our primary response in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. There are many who do this and remain unnoticed or anonymous. I'm thinking of the many women who serve our parishes and our communities, both religious women and women who are not living the consecrated life, but whose service in many ways gets taken for granted. And I think as we listen to the deacons enrich us with their experiences and the narratives of their service, we also recognize the anonymous legion of unordained deacons whose service is immensely important, and recognize that together we can be a community marked by diaconia, and for that may God be praised.
Thank you, Deacon Owen, and Deacon Gary, Deacon Chuck, and Deacon Wence. Just for your information, Deacon Gary and Deacon Chuck are in ministry full-time, and that makes them unusual in the diaconate. Most deacons, of course, have a full-time secular job, and then their ministry is over and on top of that. Deacon Wence is representative of that large group of deacons, and so they deserve, I think, a special So what I'd like to do now is have everybody stand and stretch in place. That seemed to work really well yesterday when Father Julio